Throughout Philippine history, Filipinos were confronted with various issues and controversies. Some were already settled, but many are yet to understand. History is subjective. It can be affected by the availability of resources, the interpretation of the historians, and the evolution of people's thinking. However, the conflict that you are about to discover in this presentation is a contradiction of perspective among the witnesses of the controversial Cavite Mutiny of 1872. 1872 was a historic year of two events, which Filipinos must know, as these occurrences played a major factor in the awakening of the nationalism among our countrymen.
In January of 1972, there was a brief uprising of over 200 Filipino port workers. It is known today in history as the Cavite Mutiny. The Filipino workers were demanding fair treatment and livable wages. They were protesting against the abusive and oppressive labor conditions in the Spanish naval shipyards in Cavite. They were also protesting against the forced labor policies of the Spanish colonial government, in which the Filipinos were practically slaves under Spanish colonialism. It was a system of forced labor that crippled the Filipino society and starved millions of people over the century. It was a system of enslavement, and all the workers wanted was to be treated equally and paid fairly. Before we tackle more about this topic, let us first define the word mutiny. Mutiny is a rebellion against authority. It comes from an old verb, mutine, which means to revolt. Basically, it's a forcible or passive resistance to lawful authority. It is to rise against or refuse to obey or observe authority. So what actually happened in the Cavite Mutiny? So to know more about it, let us go on to the beginning. So there was a Governor General named Carlos Maria del Torre who implemented liberal ideas and laws such as the establishment of Guardia Civil and also the secularization. This period of liberal reform would soon end in 1871 when Governor de la Torre was replaced by Governor Rafael Izquierdo. He would be famous, or rather infamous, for his iron fist type of government. He disliked the liberal reforms made by de la Torre and worked against them. He removed the privileges that the Guardia Civil enjoyed. These changes were unpopular among Filipinos, especially among the Guardia Civil. Things would come to a breaking point in January 20, 1872. Angered having their privileges revoked and their pay reduced, around 200 soldiers and laborers, led by Sergeant Fernando Lamadrid, captured Fort San Felipe in the province of Cavite, killing the Spanish officers inside. The mutineers hoped that the other soldiers would join them, but when they called the nearby infantry, they refused and attacked the mutineers. The arrival of reinforcements from Manila sealed their fate. The mutiny was soon crushed, and many of them, including Sergeant Lamadrid, was killed, and any survivors were soon arrested. The Cavite Mutiny by its own was not very significant due to its failure, but what would be significant, however, is how the colonial government responded to it. When an official investigation to the mutiny was made, the colonial government reported that the mutineers were part of a plot to cause a revolution and overthrow the government. Many prominent Filipinos were accused of being supporters of this plot. Many of the suspects were prominent leaders, lawyers, and influential residents from Manila and Cavite. And also, with the advice of Spanish friars, Governor Izquierdo emphasized the role of the native priests in the revolution, saying that they supported the rebels and thus named them as enemies of Spain. Among the people who were arrested were three native priests, Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. They were well-known figures in the secularization movement, which wanted to reduce the friars' powers, so this made them prime targets for the Spanish. In the trials, the three priests were pointed to as the masterminds of the Cavite Mutiny. There were very little evidence for these claims, but they were found guilty anyway and soon convicted. Out of all those who were arrested, 70 people were given death sentences. Some of these sentences were later reduced to life in prison or exiled to the more remote islands such as the Marianas or Guam. They were prominent Filipino priests charged with treason and sedition. The Spanish clergy connected the priests to the mutiny as part of a conspiracy to stifle the movement of secular priests who desired to have their own parishes instead of being assistants to the regular friars. So on February 17, 1872, the priests were brought to Bagumbayan Field and they were executed by garrote, a device that tightens an iron collar around the person's neck until they are killed. The three priests would then be remembered as the Gomburza, owing to the first letters of their surnames. So Father Mariano Gomez was one of these three priests. He was a truly nationalistic man. Before his death, he was designated as the head priest of Bacoor, Cavite. Aside from taking care of the spiritual necessities of the town and the church, he also taught agriculture and cottage industries. Gomez also helped in maintaining a harmonious relationship among his other priests. He fought for equal rights for native priests against the abuses of their Spanish counterparts. Also, Gomez was active in the publication of the newspaper La Verdad in Spanish, which means in English, the truth. Gomez was accused of treason, sedition, and taking active part in the Cavite Mutiny of 1872 and sentenced to death by garrote in a military court. He was placed in a mock trial and summarily executed in Manila. Gomez was the head of the three priests and spent his life writing about the abuses against Filipino priests. And at the age of 72, he was the oldest of the three priests. Another priest was Father Jose Burgos. Burgos' nationalist views, codified in editorial essays championing political and ecclesiastic reforms in favor of empowering more native clergymen, made him a target of opposition to civil authorities. He had established a reputation as a defender of the native clergy. His debates over the rights of native priests had extended to include questions of race and nationalism. So this reputation would eventually cause him to be implicated in a mutiny in Cavite. After the Cavite Mutiny on January 20, 1872, the trial of mutineer Sergeant Bonifacio Octavo revealed that a man named Zaldua had been recruiting people for an uprising. Octavo testified that this man claimed to be under the orders of Burgos, but inconsistent details during Octavo's cross-examinations called into question the validity of his testimony. Nevertheless, Governor General Rafael Izquierdo reported to Madrid that the testimony had confirmed his suspicions and pinned the blame on Burgos and the two other priests. He was 35 years old when he died. He was the youngest among the three. So the last is Father Jacinto Zamora. So Zamora had a habit of playing cards after Mass, and once he received an invitation stating that his friend had powder and munitions. So in gambler's language, powder and munitions meant that the player had much money to gamble with. So this invitation fell into the hands of the Spaniards, and worse, it was on the night of the Cavite Mutiny, led by Filipino soldier Sergeant La Madrid. This invitation was used by the Spaniards as evidence against Jacinto Zamora. The court accused them of inciting the revolt, even though the evidence was not adequate. They were found guilty and sentenced to death. It has been said by the witnesses that Zamora was disoriented during his last days. As a result, he did not give any last words before the garrote took the life from this young priest. So in the attempt of colonial government to crush the so-called revolution, they made future revolution almost inevitable. The death of Gomburza is seen by many as the start of Filipino nationalism, and immediately after their trial and execution was seen by many Filipinos as a grave injustice, and soon the three priests were made martyrs who were killed by Spanish cruelty.
What led to Cavite Mutiny? Two phases of the story. The Spanish version. Number 1. Montero's account of the Cavite Mutiny. Number 2. Official report of Governor Izquierdo on the Cavite Mutiny of 1872. The two accounts complemented and corroborated with one another, only that the general's report was more spiteful. Jose Montero Vidal, Spanish historian. Primary cause: overthrow the Spanish government due to abolishment of rights of Filipinos. It as an attempt of the Indians to overthrow the Spanish government in the Philippines. He reported to the King of Spain that the rebels wanted to overthrow the Spanish government to install a new Hari in the likes of Father Burgos and Zamora. Gomburza was claimed to start the revolution. Burgos was linked to many activities perceived as hostile towards the Spanish since he was also one of the organizers of the Committee of Reformers, which campaigned for more liberal laws. The cleric section includes Gomez and Zamora was headed by Burgos. Convicted educated men who participated in the mutiny, the sentenced life imprisonment, while members of the native clergy, headed by the Gomburza, were tried and executed by garrote. Governor General Rafael Izquierdo, Spanish military officer, implicated the native clergy who were then active in the movement toward secularization of the parishes. He highlighted the attempt to overthrow the Spanish government in the Philippines to install a new Hari in the person of Father Burgos and Zamora. The general even added the native clergy enticed other participants by giving them a charismatic assurance that their fight will not fail because God is with them, coupled with handsome promises of rewards such as employment, wealth, and ranks in the army. Izquierdo, in his report, lambasted the Indios as gullible and possessed an innate propensity for stealing. Primary source number 1. Excerpts from Montero's account of the Cavite Mutiny. The abolition of privileges enjoyed by the laborers of the Cavite Arsenal of exemption from the tribute was, according to some, the cause of the insurrection. These were, however, other causes. Source: Jose Montero Vidal, Spanish version of the Cavite Mutiny of 1872. In Gregoria Saide and Sonia Saide, Documentary Sources of the Philippines History, Volume 7. The idea of attaining their independence, it was toward this goal that they started to work with the powerful assistance. One excerpt from the official report of the Governor Izquierdo on the Cavite Mutiny of 1872. It seems definite that the insurrection was motivated and prepared by the native clergy, by the mestizos and native lawyers, and by those known here as abogadillos. Carlos Quirino, More Documents on Burgos, Philippine Studies, Manila Ateneo de Manila University, Volume 18, whose head in Tagalog would be called Hari. But it turns out that they would place at the head of the government a priest, and there were great probabilities, a certainty that the head selected would be D. Jose Burgos or D. Jacinto Zamora, parish priest of S. Pedro of Manila. One, the Filipino version. Number 1, Pardo de Tabera's account of the Cavite Mutiny. Number 2, Placat's account of the Cavite Mutiny. Pardo de Tabera's account of the Cavite Mutiny. In his point of view, the incident was a mere mutiny by the native Filipino soldiers and laborers of the Cavite arsenal who turned out to be dissatisfied with the abolition of their privileges. Indirectly, Tavera blamed Governor Izquierdo cold-blooded policies such as the abolition of privileges of the workers and native army members of the arsenal and the prohibition of the founding of School of Art and Trades for the Filipinos, which the general believed as a cover-up for the organization of a political club. Edmond Plauchat, French writer, complemented Tavera's account and analyzed the motivation of the 1872 Cavite Mutiny. Society of Arts and Trades is not founded. General Izquierdo suspended the opening of the school a day before its inauguration. The Frenchman, however, dwelt more on the execution of the three martyrs first, which he actually witnessed. Secondary source number 2, excerpts from Pardo de Tabera's account of the Cavite Mutiny. The arrival of General Izquierdo, 1871 to 1873, was the signal for a complete change in the aspect of affairs. The new governor soon made it clear that his view were different from those of La Torre. Source: Pardo de Tavera, Historical Account of the Philippines from its Discovery to 1903. Census of the Philippines Islands. Filipinos had great hopes of an improvement in the affairs of their country, while the friars are, on the other hand, feared that their power in the colony would soon be completely a thing of the past. Primary source number 2, excerpts from Edmond Plauchat account of the Cavite Mutiny. The immediate cause to a peremptory order from the governor Izquierdo exacting personal taxes from the Filipino laborers in the engineering and artillery corps in the Cavite arsenal and requiring them to perform forced labor like ordinary subjects. Until then, these workers in the arsenal had been enjoying exemptions from both taxes and forced labor. It is the same in source, Edmond Plauchat, the Cavite Mutiny of 1872, and the Martyrdom of Gomburza in Gregorio Saide and Sonia Saide. Documentary source of the Philippine History, Volume 7.
This is the result of the mutiny. As we all know, the Cavite Mutiny is one of the events that could justify our Filipino ancestors' nationalistic or patriotic identity. The presumption is that prior to this event, the citizen did not feel unified as a nation, and any act of opposition to Spain's foreign presence was a local act of rebellion to which the rest of the world was unconnected. After 3.5 centuries of foreign occupation marked by an enlightened government and blatant oppression of civilians and natural resources, the common opponent had emerged, and the people felt empowered and united in their battle for the right to govern for themselves, to mold their own fates, and to bear the consequences. This is the excerpts of the court-martial decision on Gumburza. It asserts here the sentence imposed for the three martyr priests, namely Fathers Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, for their involvement in the Cavite Mutiny. Convicted educated men who participated in the mutiny including Joaquin Pardo de Tavera, Jose Basa, Antonio Maria Regidor, Pio Basa, and other Filipino lawyers were suspended from the practice of the law and sentenced life imprisonment, while members of the native clergy headed by the Gumburza were tried and executed by garrote. In 1872, two notable incidents occurred: the Cavite Mutiny of 1872 and the martyrdom of the three martyr priests in the names of Fathers Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora or the Gumburza. Moreover, in relation to such incident, some of us do not understand that there were other various statements. The execution of Gumburza is a key factor in the emergence of nationalism among the citizens. So us Filipinos must consider the different points of view among Spanish and Filipino accounts, since this event resulted to another tragic but significant event in the history. As we can see in this slide, both of them have different perspectives. According to Spanish account, the main reason why this event had happened is because the workers of Cavite Arsenal enjoyed abolition of privilege like non-payment of tributes and the exemption of labor force. Also, Spaniards believed that it was a secret plan that was organized and well planned by the educated leaders. While on the other hand, the Filipino perspective states that this had happened due to the discontentment of the Cavite workers and it is a secluded event, meaning it was not seen by many or it is far away from other people because their purpose is to reclaim the privilege that had been stripped away from the workers. In the first statement of Spanish perspective, they view fireworks as a sign of aggression because on January 20, 1872, the district of Sampaloc celebrated the Feast of the Virgin of Loreto. Unfortunately, participants to the feast celebrated the occasion with the usual fireworks displays, but the people in Cavite misinterpret the fireworks as an indication of an attack, so a group of 200 men led by Sergeant Lamadrid initiated an attack in Sampaloc district, attacking or targeting Spanish officers at sight and seized the arsenal. While on the Filipino perspective, the group of 200 men is said to be comprised by soldiers, arsenal laborers, and Cavite residents that launched an assassination attack on the commanding officers and any Spanish officers in the vicinity. The second statement talks about the execution of the three martyr priests of the Gumburza. They have both different outlooks in this incident. In Spanish statement, the priests are executed so that Filipinos will be threatened and do not perform those kind of daring act again. But on the contrary, the execution of three Filipino priests incited a current of compassion for the martyrs and repugnance towards the foreign rulers who might bring the weapon down on the heads of the innocent, and it serves as a key factor in the emergence of nationalism among the Filipinos. Based on Spanish account, Montero and Izquierdo stated that the accomplices of Manila and Cavite are intended to kill the high-ranking Spanish officials, followed by the slaughter of the friars, whereas Filipino account said that the Cavite Mutiny was used as a powerful tool by the Spanish friars and Izquierdo, who intensified it into a full-blown conspiracy. and what forced them to take aggressive action is the oppression of the friars by the Spanish central government because they want to retain power in the Philippines. As we can see in the second statement, it speaks about the conflicting causes that precipitate the event. Spanish account asserts that the revolution is triggered by dirty propagandas that circulated and reached Philippines, but Filipino account claimed that the restriction on the establishment of schools of arts and trades for Filipinos ignited the mutiny.
Bias and prejudice may be evident, but they are undeniably rooted subconsciously as a part of the person telling the story as their limitation. Being exposed to differing perspective is needed to gain both sides of the argument to form an informed historical consciousness. In the disputes and contrasting opinions about the Cavite Rebellion in the Philippine history that illuminated the two phases of the Cavite Mutiny of 1872, and after researching and carefully writing each perspectives with supporting details and refraining from exerting bias and strictly following an objective approach to each source of the event, the authors of this presentation stand for the Filipinos' perspective of the Cavite Mutiny. The conclusion of the authors were based on the following grounds. First is the noticeable bias detected in Montero's account of the event, which was also noted by an American historian named James A. Leroy. He said that the usually sober and colorless Montero E. Vidal becomes very rabid at his recital of the Cavite episode. He is overly positive not only in denouncing the priests who were executed and the deportees as guilty, but in proclaiming their movements as actually separatist in character. He also ridicules at length in the account of the Frenchman Plochut, although they are both a resident in or near Manila at the time of the occurrences. Second is that the central government failed to conduct an investigation on what truly transpired, but relied on reports of Izquierdo and the friars and the opinion of the public. Evidence to support the charges did not accompany the decision, which merely stated that the court had found them guilty of conspiring to overthrow the government and proclaim a Republic of the Philippines with Father Burgos as president. The defendants were given a counsel chosen by the court. The counsel, a Dr. Jose Arrieta, on reading his brief, said it was not possible to defend Father Burgos because he had already confessed. Having said so, the priest was surprised on hearing the defense. He protested, "That is not my defense. The course has changed it. I have not confessed, and I deny every charge brought against me as having no foundation in fact or in act." There were even stories circulated that the evidence against the three priests had been fabricated, which made the court-martial proceedings highly anomalous. Upon further research of the events that led up to the Cavite Mutiny, Governor Izquierdo was merely setting the pattern for his reign of terror, only too well known in Philippine history. The fuse was ready. All that remained to be done was to set it off, and Governor Izquierdo committed a blunder when he had the priest executed and the other suspects exiled or otherwise sentenced for scarcely proved complicity in the Cavite revolt is something that even most historians admit. His reign as the Governor General was marked as reactionary, as he made policies that undone the work of De la Torre, which were all considered to be liberal, and those policies, along with the maltreatment of the governed over 3 centuries, have doomed the Spanish rule in the Philippines and gave them the sense of nationality which has been suppressed for so long. The Cavite Mutiny of 1872 was a really prominent event in the Filipinos' fight for independence against the Spaniards. With different versions told by different people, it is really hard to find the truth. One version justified the martyrdom of Gomburza, and the other said that the mutiny was a fair response to injustice amongst the native workers and laborers. With all the differences in the story told, there is one fact that stands. This event led to awaken the Filipino people's patriotism and nationalism that paved way for their freedom. The information in this presentation were gathered from the following references flashed on your screens. All good things must come to an end. And yes, that also includes our presentation. I am Rachel Calandria together with my groupmates Dane Osilia, Ferjan Baudilio, and Denise Maderazo. We hope you learned something today and had a good taste of the past. Thank you for listening.